Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 14:10 Pocket Check. Checking pockets. That was what Kara was doing. But she was being discreet about it, and using the proximity of nobles who had come to greet the king's heir as an excuse to assess the contents of their pockets. It was disappointing, really. Nobody brought much with them to this sort of formal event. Lady Kara, I see that you have volunteered for royal babysitting duty for the day. Tell me, how are the crown prince and his ladies getting along? One of the nobles asked. Kara smiled up at him. Quite well, really. I'm sure you know that his relationship with consort Mildred is a love match, and they are adorable together. But they have both been spending quite some time with Princess Rue, helping with her training, her combat training mostly, but it was much less fun if she didn't give ambiguous responses. So, she is prepared for her new role? The nobleman asked as he noticed the sharp claws of the hatchling digging through his pockets. There was nothing in them for her to take, so he wasn't worried about it. In fact, if the tiny princess did manage to tear his clothes, it would be a most wonderful story to tell the others tonight. It was unlikely, given the magical nature of the fabric. But she was a commander-rank shadow dragon hatchling, so it wasn't entirely impossible. Not like Kara's dress, which was mythic-ranked spider silk, and completely immune to small poking claws. Dissatisfied with her find, and not fully understanding why Kara enjoyed this game of checking pockets so much, the little one squawked an annoyed complaint, not bothering to use her words out loud. But her mental voice came through clearly. Why don't they have anything? You said that there would be shiny things or snacks. She complained. You can't win them all, or you would get fat and sleepy. Kara consoled her with a gentle pat on the head. That was not an acceptable answer. The little dragon glared at Kara, sure that she was being teased, until Kara liberated a wrapped candy from someone's pocket and passed it to her. Oh yeah, toffee. I love toffee. Perhaps it was all about luck? Or maybe she was not supposed to search with her hands, but her other senses, and then just recover the snacks? She still had much to learn, it seemed. The noble smiled indulgently as the little dragon chewed happily on the toffee, with a confused look on her face, as if she had never tasted it before. Only when the aging noble who always carried candies for the grandchildren saw the wrapper did he realize that it had, in fact, come from his pocket. What exactly are you teaching the little one? He asked Kara, who was doing her best to pretend nothing strange had happened. The joys of candy. As it turns out, she's a huge fan of toffee. The old dragon just shook his head and sighed. It would be rude to accuse the Avatar's friend of stealing here in such a public place. But what he was more impressed by was the fact that he hadn't even noticed until she had already unwrapped it and given the candy away. What is the process here? Nobody bothered to tell me. Do we just snack and wait for them all to come back? Or is this like an all-night party, and we just go until we get sleepy, then return to our rooms? Well, I suppose we need to find a new room, since someone blew ours up last time we were here. But you get the point, Kara asked. The nobles all winced at the reminder, as the rescue efforts had only just been completed and the worst of the rubble cleared. It would be months or years before the palace was completely rebuilt, but the circumstances had called the avatar of the world dragon and the young princess back to the castle already. While the dragons weren't superstitious, they also weren't stupid. Having them back was a bad omen. The investigation into who had set off the explosion wasn't even over, and the intended targets were back in the palace. Unless the new king did something drastic like interrogating everyone who was in the building at the time of the explosion, there was no way that was safe, and that meant there was no way that anyone else in the palace knew if they were safe. You could just be doing your job, sitting in a meeting or running an errand when the next attack came. It might not be another bomb, but what if it was poisoned food, toxic gas, or something else that would kill everyone in an area, just to be certain that they got their target this time? Ironically, the return of Princess Rue had done what the attack on her had not. It had turned the public sentiment among the nobles in her favor. When she was just a forgotten princess in a remote wing of the palace with her tutor, the news about her was nothing more than interesting palace gossip. But now she was in the main royal wing with the king and his closest advisors, and the threats on her life were threats on everyone with influence. Or everyone who hoped to have influence, as the factions within the court would rapidly shift with the crowning of a new king. Carl smiled as the nobles gossiped about the recent events, while he wondered if he should give Rue at least one more skill, just to ensure that the lived up to her potential and did eventually become an immortal. Or perhaps it was the next attack that Misty was waiting on, before she sent him and Kara back to their own time. It was impossible to guess what the time dragon was thinking, or what she would deem as mission complete. But as Rue was still young, Carl did hope that Misty wasn't going to leave him here until she was actually queen. Though she might be announced soon just for security's sake. Chapter 14:11 Shotgunning Juice. Carl had nearly an hour to mingle and consider his fate before the doors to the room opened once more, and King Lucas came in with Princess Rue at his side. Mildred followed a few seconds later, as was proper for a consort, but she went straight to Kara, who was teaching her daughter how to pick up juice glasses in her jaws, since her coordination was not well suited to holding cups in her claws. "What are you teaching my daughter? She does not need to learn how to do shots in dragon form," Mildred complained. "They're juice," Kara replied calmly, while the nearby dragons laughed. The little one nodded, then tipped her head back and poured the glass of juice down her throat, burped and passed out. "See, all good. Though the fact that she doesn't get a sugar rush is a bit disappointing. I was looking forward to a hyper hatchling," she added. Mildred sighed as she carefully took the child back from Kara and extricated the cup from the sleeping dragon's jaws. "You really do live and breathe chaos, don't you? Why would you want a hyper hatchling in a room full of Dragon Clan nobles? Why would I not want a hyper hatchling in a room full of stuffy nobles?" The old dragon who Kara had stolen the toffee from laughed at her response. "The badger understands. These functions are entirely too boring. A hatchling can be excused for bad behavior. After all, they're still hatchlings and curious about the world. Keeps things interesting." As he finished speaking, King Lucas reached the throne which had been set up at one end of the room, and took his seat with Rue standing beside him. "My people, I thank you for the warm welcome," he began, silencing the chatter in the room. "There are a few important items that will need to be clarified today, with the change in leadership. It wouldn't do to leave royal status in limbo. First off, the majority of my royal siblings will retain their status as prince and princess until such time as a second heir is born to my lineage. After that, the branches of the family will be separated, and the contest for the crown may begin." He paused as the royals and nobles cheered. The power plays of the princes and princesses struggling to become most powerful and take the throne was one of their greatest sources of entertainment, and they had all known that it was inevitable that they would be relegated to nobles with royal blood. Lucas continued. "Next, I would like to announce that I will be taking Princess Rue as my queen. Her ceremony will be held on the next new moon, as is tradition. But that brings me to a point that many more of you are much more invested in than the matters of my harem. As the former king is leaving for the immortal realm soon, and intends to remain there for the foreseeable future, much of the royal court will be reassigned ranks. He has chosen not to take his queen or harem with him, only his closest advisor. As such, the former harem members will be given the titles of royal lady, and a permanent home in the palace." A shocked silence fell over the room, and Kara poked the old man next to her for answers. He didn't name a queen dowager. The queen wasn't his mother, but many expected her to get the title and influence to go with it now that her husband is leaving for the immortal realm. A royal lady without a husband on this planet is something akin to a lady in waiting, or a widow. The old man whispered. So, the queen had been demoted to one step above a servant, and no longer held any official power. But that made sense to Kara. For one, she was insufferable. But she also wasn't the mother of Lucas, Rue or Mildred. However, that left all her supporters in a hard spot. The king had advanced unexpectedly, and they had tied their political future to someone who no longer had any influence to pressure the king to assist them. At best, she might be able to make her way into the royal council, which would salvage her political power. But not to the extent that being queen dowager would have. "Isn't his mother alive?" Kara asked quietly. The old man nodded. "She is, but she doesn't like the political game. She was in the throne room with him earlier, but didn't come to stand with him. She's over by the wall there." Her eyes were red, but she didn't look sad. Kara thought that they might have been those weird, almost happy tears, when you knew that you should be happy for someone, but also that you would be separated from them. The king wasn't taking her, his first love, to the immortal realm with him. She would remain here, which was likely for the best, as she had little to no chance of reaching immortality. But they had been lovers for centuries. That had to be hard. It would be like losing her Carl. She would survive, but life would not be the same. Carl winked at her as he heard her thoughts, and Kara stuck out her tongue. If anything, he would struggle to reach immortality as fast as she did. He wouldn't be leaving her behind when it was time to graduate from this world and find new things to taste test. With the soul bond, they also wouldn't lose the Dana Mage, and most of the others would be able to keep up easily enough. Thor would need another use of evolution, but that wasn't a big deal. The problem would be getting him to leave Tessa behind if they were going to let her grow naturally. You couldn't force understanding of the fundamental rules, and Thor might opt to stay with her instead of going with them. A Sero pack leader wouldn't leave his pack behind. Carl tried not to laugh as Kara mentally calculated the odds that Thor had children by the time that they returned. There was no way to know what date it would be when Misty brought them back. Chapter 14:12 A Familiar Little Dragon. King Lucas went on for a few minutes about nobles that Carl didn't care about, naming advisors and granting a few noble titles to his siblings who would officially be taking over new roles under his reign. Then, he rose and moved to greet everyone, ending the formal part of the meeting, but also starting the fun part in Kara's estimation. This was the perfect opportunity for anyone upset about Rue being named the next queen to strike and try to eliminate her. She was too surrounded by people to see the threats coming, and she wasn't yet the queen officially, so the punishment would be lighter than the 1,000 days of torture before death by beheading that was given for attempted regicide. Rue still had eternal lightning barrier over her, but there were plenty of people in the room that could shatter it if they tried hard enough. But Kara didn't expect a direct attack of that sort. More likely, they would try to tag her with some sort of fatal curse that would take effect slowly, or poison her. Poisoning a dragon wasn't easy, but it was a tried and true classic. She was slowly making her way through the rest of the royal family, who were mostly giving her insincere congratulations on being chosen, while openly doubting that she had the power or personality to be able to hold on to the position. There were many queens who didn't try to fight for political power in the past, but they were always the favorites of the king. Rue had some potential to wield power, but she was a child, a token placeholder that most assumed was only there so that nobody misunderstood the king's affection for Mildred. That would get Rue through the first few years, but once she started to grow up, she would have to seriously impress both the king and the court if she was going to have a peaceful life instead of having everyone around her try to force her out of her position. Envoy Carl, thank you for all your assistance getting to this point. Will you be able to stay a bit longer while I get settled? Rue asked when she finally made it to him. Of course. I will stay until I am satisfied that you're ready for what is to come. But don't sell yourself short. You'll grow into it wonderfully. Carl agreed. The grow into it made a number of the royals laugh. With his assistance, what wouldn't she grow into? First he had triggered her to get a class, then advanced 3 times in short order, and now she had flown into the palace as a royal shadow dragon, not a dragonkin who couldn't shift. If he assisted her any more than he already had, wouldn't it be pointless to even have a king? She would eclipse them all for a few glorious years, and then graduate to immortality. It just might go down as one of the strangest incidents in Gthuzan royal history. The presence of the World Dragon avatar really highlighted in the minds of the Shadow Dragons just why the World Dragon was called the god of the system. It seemed to come so naturally to the system god's avatar to simply force a chosen subject to grow. There was obviously some limit to it, as the avatar was still mythic ranked despite being so large and presumably older than he looked. But giving a young dragon decades of growth advantage was no small feat. Few understood that better than Dicarion, avatar of the god of death. It was his god who had declared that Carl may not have a baby dragon, and Dicarion was increasingly certain that the proclamation had not just been an idle rejection. Rue was satisfied with Carl's answer, and wanted to talk more, but was quickly pulled away by others, all eager to get to properly know her. But that was not what Carl was watching. Kara would make sure nobody seriously injured Rue. He was more interested in who was not here than who was present. For one, the queen was notably absent, a silent protest to her not being named Queen Dowager, no doubt. But a number of the queen's children, especially the younger princes, had departed the room immediately after the announcement. They hadn't been missed yet, as everyone was so busy, but it wouldn't escape the king's notice forever that some of his siblings were missing. Little dragon, it's a pleasure to see you again. Do we have business today? He asked, making sure not to give anything away in public. Not yet, but soon. I just dropped in for a bit of dinner, and then we can talk. There is a lot left on the list for you to take care of. This one was a bit longer than most, but I've got a full itinerary for you. Misty agreed. A full itinerary? The others are going to be more than a little annoyed with us by the time that we get back. Carl joked. Misty giggled softly. Yes, it will be quite the time, but from their end, it won't be more than a minute or 2. I'm quite looking forward to getting to see the look on the Dana Mage's face when you return and the soul bond balances you. 2 again. The wedding was superb, but this one should be pretty good too. Carl winked at her. If I didn't know better, I would think that you were raised by Kara. You enjoy chaos entirely too much for someone whose innate element is anything else. Misty smirked. That's because you don't understand well enough. Everything looks like chaos when you can only see one tiny portion of the bigger picture. But once you do, then it all starts to make sense. A strange sense of understanding flickered in Carl's mind, and he realized that he had just understood one more small bit about the true nature of chaos and order. Chapter 14:13 Don't take it personally. Moments later, A butler came over to call for Carl to join them in the private dining room with the king and his closest acquaintances. Bishop Misty, I wish I could say that it is a pleasure to see you again. But you are always welcome to join us for a meal. The butler added in a polite tone that did not match his words. I don't think that he likes you, Carl noted. They have a thing against time dragons. You learn not to take it personally. But the food here is amazing, and they're good about not wasting food trying to poison me. Misty agreed. That would be the most pointless thing ever, Carl thought. How did you poison someone who could see the future and the past? The trio followed the butler and Mildred into the dining hall, which currently contained only a dozen people, all royals and all mythic rank except for Rue. The young princess looked confused when Misty walked in, as she wasn't expecting any new faces at this meeting, and the time dragon didn't look any older than she was. We have a surprise guest? She asked. Bishop Misty of the Dragon Church, Your Highness. Her appearance can be deceiving, but she is one of the most respected elders on the entire continent. The butler informed her. Misty nodded happily, then sniffed at the air, guessing what they were having for dinner. Not that she actually had to guess. She could just look a few minutes into the future to find out. That much was almost certain to happen, no matter what. The staff led them all to the table, where Carl was seated near the foot, along with Kara, Misty, and a few of the king's uncles, who were continuing their roles as advisors and ministers. There was no need to change them out, as they were loyal to his father from the start, and Lucas trusted them to continue doing their jobs properly, even with a new sovereign. Changing the entire council with a new king would throw things into chaos, with such a large loss of expertise. But the people who were in the room were unlikely to be the reason that Misty had chosen to show up now, and not just pull Carl back, or let him leave through a portal when he thought he was done. No, there was something about to happen that was enough to get her to show up in person. While Carl was deeply concerned by Misty's purpose in arriving in this timeline, Misty was having a grand time watching everyone nervously wait for her to do something outlandish. She knew very well what her reputation was like, and she had deliberately shown up early, just for the entertainment factor. Her presence here wouldn't change anything major. The plots were already put in place. All that was left was to watch them play out, and then move on to their next mission. Dinner was just being served when a commotion started with the nobles partying out in the main ballroom. That was what Misty was waiting for, and she immediately split her senses into 1,000 nearby locations so that she could get every single bit of juicy palace gossip in real time. Down beneath them, in the royal wing's residential areas, there was a major meeting of the Queen, now the former Queen's, faction going. Your Majesty, we are not going to simply stand for this, are we? That brat cannot be allowed to rule. Think of what she will do to our branch of the family if she is allowed to choose punishments. One of the younger princes was complaining, just beat her and lock her in a closet. She's afraid of the dark, it's always worked before. One of the twins suggested, resorting to the bullying tactics that he had used all his life. You forget she has a class now, and she is stronger than you are. Even if you tried to bully that brat now, she would likely beat you. Worse, she flew in on her own, transformed. That bastard from Sihosesa found a way to awaken her dormant dragon form. An older prince added, Silence. We will not let her ascend the throne. That will never happen. However, we need to be very careful about how we do this. If Lucas suspects that we are taking action, he will have the entire royal guard breathing down our necks. I have been quietly asking around today, and it appears that only our personal guards are still loyal to us. The rest have defected to the king's faction and are unwilling to work with us until at least after the first purge of partisans from the palace ranks. That could be years, and by then, the elf will be sitting on the throne. When we act, it has to be before her ceremony. We have until the new moon so we can be meticulous. I have a plan made, and there is no way that she will survive this one. Took a lot of effort, but I've gathered everything that we need. Just follow the plan and it will be fine. The Queen insisted. And the bomb in the library wing? Are we certain that it won't trace back to anyone from our faction? One of the princesses asked. 100%. The only ones who could have testified were vaporized by the blast. The Queen smiled in satisfaction for half a second before the doors were kicked in. Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. You are all being detained under suspicion of complicity in the attempted assassination of royal consort Mildred. Running will be taken as a sign of guilt. A booming voice declared. The commander of the royal guard stepped into the room with his elite troops behind him, and a grim look on his face. What proof do you have to make that accusation? The Queen demanded. Both maids who were inside the room when the bomb was planted survived the blast. I am not at liberty to discuss the details, but I have seen the evidence taken from their minds. You made one crucial mistake, Your Majesty. You used a man you knew that you could trust. If you had used a stranger, a mercenary we couldn't identify, there might never have been enough evidence. But you didn't, and now we will need everyone present here to come in for questioning, he announced. The Queen smiled. There was no way that they could prove that the bombing was actually paid by her, and not just committed by someone who had worked for her in the past. But she hadn't yet realized that this wasn't about the bombing. The memory extraction during their interrogation was going to tell the interrogators exactly what was said in that room, and the charge would quickly change to conspiracy to assassinate the Queen candidate. Chapter 14:14 In a hurry. Misty smiled as everything went exactly as planned, then looked ahead a few minutes to make sure that the personal guards really did turn on their assigned royals. They were supposed to be loyal to the country first, their assigned royal second. But you never knew if that remained true after years of service. All that it took was for one of them to crack, and that would be the end of their whole scheme. And someone always cracked. It was inevitable, and Misty lived for the drama of the moment when they realized that everything had gone wrong. But the truly glorious part, and the primary reason that she had come early today, was because Carl and Kara had been the absolute perfect choice to send to straighten out this timeline. They hadn't even realized that there was someone else here trying to keep things on a different course, and because they hadn't been looking for anyone else tampering with time, they hadn't even been noticed. After all, how was anyone but a time dragon supposed to know who was supposed to be in this timeline and who was not? To anyone else, they would think that it was just the Supreme Lady's foresight that had sent him here, and they would never suspect that he had come back through time with knowledge of the future. Or some knowledge of the future, as Misty was reasonably sure that neither the Carl nor the Badger had ever taken a proper history class. As everyone in the royal dining room began their meal, the true entertainment began in the cells beneath the castle. Bound in specially enchanted chains that would prevent the prisoners from transforming, or using any magic, the interrogation was about to begin. This was the next spot that Misty was expecting someone to show up and try to mess with current events, but so far, there was no sign of them. It could be because of her presence and the barriers that she had set. But she suspected that they were already here somewhere, and just waiting for the perfect moment. If she was lucky, they might even be blissfully unaware that there was a time dragon here. However, Misty was doomed to disappointment today. The royal guards who had been in the room didn't even try to resist, and simply informed the interrogator of everything that had happened, before submitting themselves for punishment and reassignment. It might not look good for their future prospects, but they were unlikely to see prison time for their actions. They were simply doing their duty as guards in the room while the plotting was being done. They would get some punishment for not alerting anyone to what amounted to a treasonous murder plot. But not nearly as harsh of a punishment as some of the others. Unfortunately for Misty's sense of justice, the royal family members would get off very easily. It was simply too unpopular for a newly risen king to immediately target a large portion of the royal family when there hadn't been a battle for the throne. He would be seen as needlessly vindictive and cruel, even to those closest to him. Instead, only one or two would be chosen as scapegoats, and the others would be released with a slap on the wrist and much of their privilege curtailed. For the pampered royals, that was a fate nearly as bad as death. Misty's attention was on the happenings in other portions of the castle, but Carl was paying more attention to what was going on in the room with them. The royal advisors and other ranking officials were all doing their best to make friends with Rue, who didn't have any known political affiliations, but there was a cultural gap that they simply couldn't get past. They had all spent centuries in the inner circles of the palace. They hadn't trained their skills in longer than Rue had been alive, they didn't really wander the gardens or the abandoned sections of the castle, and only a few of them were fans of the library. So they really had very little in common. But that was party of the entertainment as far as Lucas was concerned. Everyone wanted to find a way into the Queen candidate's good graces, but Rue was the most difficult possible choice. Not just because her interests were uncommon, but also because she had no interest at all in fame or fortune. She was about to get both, but she wasn't even interested in what she was getting, much less able to be bribed with more. Now, if they were smart, they would have realized that she had a huge sweet tooth, and they would have offered her samples of exotic new foods as an excuse to get to sit and speak with her in the future. However, none of them had noticed that small detail yet. The Queen also had a rather adept protector with her. While most of her new friends were waiting along the wall with the other minor advisors and staff, Flicker, the divine fire dragon, was hovering near Rue and guiding the conversations in strange directions. She could see through all the simple plots that the ministers had come up with, and she was happy to confuse and taunt them until they gave up. Our work here is done. Once the meal is finished, say your goodbyes to Rue, and then we are off to our next mission. Misty whispered. Isn't that a bit sudden? Considering everything that is going on at the moment? Carl asked. The time dragon just shrugged. It will be fine. You're going to leave her a gift. To remember you anyhow, and it will protect her. Great, now he had to come up with a good parting gift. I will need at least until morning for that. If I'm going to come up with something good, I need some time to do the runes. Carl countered. Fine, you can have until after breakfast. Then we really need to get going, or someone is going to notice. Chapter 14:15 Farewell Gift. After dinner, Carl, Kara and Misty were led to a set of rooms in the royal wing of the palace, near the dining rooms. Everyone else was being kept busy, and Rue had been dragged away by the royal tailors, who had just realized that she only had a handful of appropriate dresses, and those had mostly come from Kara. That would never do, so the princess would be up most of the night being fitted for her new role, which left Carl alone while Kara and Misty played Go on an oversized board. It was impossible to tell if the Chaos Badger was really good or really bad at the game, but the Time Dragon looked incredibly frustrated with the way that the game was going. Carl thought for a moment about what Misty had said, when she mentioned him giving a gift to Rue before they left. She said that it would keep her safe as she grew. Carl knew of many ways that could be accomplished, from something as simple as giving her a mythic-ranked Eternal Lightning Barrier, to something that would boost her stats. But the most obvious one would be giving her a Guardian-type statue. She had Flicker now, so she wasn't going to be alone, even if the rest of the group that had agreed to watch over her in exchange for the skills he had taught were to renege on their agreements. But it wouldn't hurt to give her a bodyguard spell statue. They could step into danger without fear, knowing that they could be summoned again. That was an incredible benefit to Rue's safety, and they would be completely incapable of betraying her. So that is what he made for her. There were shadow element stones in Ray's space, but Carl decided not to use those. They were already arranged in precise patterns, part of her display. Instead, he went into one of the covered pits and collected a nice, glowing earth elemental stone, of the mythic rank. Ray wouldn't miss that. She had buried it so that it didn't mess up the ambience of her home. She also had no use for it herself. There were plenty more that were already out on display, and both Thor and Tion had all they could need. It only took him a few minutes to do the runes on it, but a small stone was far from being a proper gift to remember his visit by. So, he used earth manipulation to create a ball of slightly translucent black mythic ranked stone around it, before slowly shaping the final product into a shadow dragon that looked as much like Rue's transformation as he could. But this one had a deep brown, almost black, glowing stone at the core, and Carl had deliberately carved hollows so that the eyes and claws glowed faintly in the dark. Rue might not notice it right away, but if she set it out in her room, she would see it at night. That might not be the wisest option, Carl realized. While it was on display, there was a chance that someone might steal it or destroy it to disable the effect. But he was having too much fun forming the stone to stop. He was a little short on sleep after working late into the night, but when Carl got up in the morning, Misty and Kara were still playing Go, and the palace staff was just beginning to prepare for breakfast. "If Princess Rue is awake, can you please arrange a meeting?" Carl asked one of the staff after he was showered and ready to face the day. "Of course, emissary. The princess has been eagerly awaiting your message. You didn't hear from me, but she woke up an hour before dawn, unable to go back to sleep until she gave you the good news." The maid replied. The maid left for a few minutes, then came back in with a visibly hyper Rue. "Carl, look at the pretty dress they made." She giggled, giving a spin in her elaborately embroidered new outfit. "Oh, very nice. And I have a gift for you too, young queen of the Shadow Dragons." Carl handed her the statue as the girls put away their game board and came to watch. "Oh, this is beautiful. Does it glow?" "It feels like it should glow," Rue asked. "It does glow, but that's not the primary purpose." Carl laughed, then leaned in to whisper in her ear about how to activate the bodyguards. "Why does this feel like you're leaving?" Rue pouted, as she realized that their moods didn't match. "Sorry, little one. It's time that I run off and take care of other duties. I came to get you back on your feet, and now you are. You've advanced above the others your age, you're on a strong path to the mythic rank and maybe even immortality. Plus, you get to be queen, and nobody will ever be able to bully you again. If they do, you can just call on your friends, and they will put an end to it." He replied, "Fine, but I will come to check on you later when I'm all grown up and my position is secure." Carl nodded. "I will be looking forward to seeing you again. Now why don't you try out that new spell I showed you?" Rue nodded, and summoned her bodyguards. Carl wasn't sure what he had been expecting. His were Lamia, Remy's were Naga warriors, but Rue's were dwarves. Two stout female dwarven warriors with shields and axes, ready to fight to defend her honor. "Well, that is unexpected." Carl laughed. "Oh? Are yours not dwarves?" "Dwarven ladies are tough," she asked. "Mine are Lamia, the snake ladies with the dragonkin-looking upper bodies. I thought that yours would be dragonkin, perhaps lizard folk. I certainly didn't expect a dragon queen to summon a pair of dwarves as her bodyguards." Rue shrugged. "We can tell everyone that they were a gift. There are plenty of dwarves in Saihosesa, and we've got dwarven allies." Kara smirked. "I vote that you just refuse to tell anyone where they came from. Just have them follow you everywhere with no explanation, and let the whole palace wonder where you got a pair of mythic bodyguards. Oh, the drama that will start. Great idea. It should even be enough to distract them all from gossiping about Lucas. You should have heard some of the awful things they said about him last night." Rue agreed, her smile turning to a frown. At the memory. You'll set them straight in no time. Now, should we get breakfast before the three of us have to leave? Chapter 14-16 Long-winded speeches. Leaving before the meal probably would have been the better idea, Carl realized. It had been an entire hour of tearful goodbyes, and then another hour of polite goodbyes from the king's advisors and ministers, all of whom were anxious to thank Carl for the hard work he had put into getting Rue ready for her role. After a night of careful consideration, they had all come to the same conclusion. Rue really was one of the best options for Queen. She was smart, quick to adapt, fast-growing. And she listened to the king without arguing, and without trying to assert dominance over him or overrule his decisions. A queen who actually stood at his side and supported him would make the king's life so much easier. And Rue had a bit of a hero complex for her older brother. When it came to matters of state, she might have her own ideas, but she wasn't the sort of person who would throw a tantrum in public or undermine him to get her way. Many past royals suffered through political marriages where they had to handle their partners and ended up constantly stressed. Putting Rue in that position, where all the other women who came later would be beneath her and not hold the status to be in the room for the most important meetings, would be a huge relief for everyone, not just the king. By now, they were all aware of the basics of what had happened with the Queen's faction last night. But the fallout hadn't been decided yet, only the fact that many were likely to see their careers end, as the king had lost faith in them. However, Carl would not be around to see what the final determination was. Misty was beginning to look impatient as he said his farewells, and prepared to open a portal so they could leave. "Wait, let me do it. If you do it, who knows where we will end up?" Misty complained. Carl shrugged. He didn't have the power to move through time, and he was reasonably sure he could aim well enough to hit the right planet, even if things had changed. He did use landmarks as his targeting method, not buildings. Misty opened the portal into what looked like a young girl's bedroom, and ushered Carl through first, followed by Kara, before coming herself. If she didn't go last, who knew what might try to sneak through? "Where is this? It doesn't smell like you," Kara noted as Misty closed the portal behind them. "It's a spare room in the palace." "Well, at the moment anyhow. Now, we need to move along, but first you need directions." "Kara, you're in your natural form for this one. Carl, you're going as yourself. I mean, as the cat demon version of you. You can do the new one if you like. Anyone who knows you will know that they're the same person. This mission will be a shorter one. All that you need to do is to go collect a set of system stones for safekeeping, and then we're on to the next mission," she explained. "And why am I stealing system stones?" Carl asked. "For safekeeping, of course. If you don't take them, then the wrong people will find them and destroy them before they're needed again. Don't stress about it, we're going to put them right back when we're done." Carl laughed at her innocent expression. That explained why nobody could find the system stones that were supposed to be lost in an instance created by an ancient king. Because they were no longer there. So, someone had likely found the right spot, but the stones were no longer there, so they thought that it was the wrong spot and kept looking. "Is there a reason that it's us?" Kara asked. "Of course. Who else could actually remove them? If Carl wasn't the avatar of the world dragon, he wouldn't be able to remove a functional set of system stones. The only way to move them when they're working is to ask the world dragon. So, they usually end up being a sitting target for those who want to destroy them." Carl nodded. "And the world dragon doesn't bother about it because if you can't take care of your most precious belongings, you probably deserved it. Most of the world values the items, and should know that they're essential to their very survival. Now you're getting it. But by the time that you arrive, they will have forgotten where they are. You just need to get there before the giants do. Remove the stones, and I will come pick you up." Carl sighed. "And why do I feel like this will be a matter of hours ahead of the giants?" "Because the giants attacked when the instance was created, and that's a terrible time to relocate the stones. You'd be stuck inside for a century. So we need to do it now. But the giants still remember where the instance should be, even if it doesn't appear in exactly the same spot as last time." Misty elaborated. Kara shrugged, dismissing all concerns. "I like this plan. Messing with giants is fun." It really was. They took everything so seriously that it was impossible not to be amused by their overreactions every time that things didn't go their way. Even a single lost battle was a major national crisis in their minds. "Is there anything else that we should know?" Carl asked. "Probably not. I'm not allowed to just tell you everything, for the same reason that I don't accompany you. Time dragons aren't the only ones that can move through time, and my presence alerts others. So you will go alone, make the change, and then they have to guess what, if anything, happened that was important enough to gain my attention." "And did one of those people who moves through time have anything to do with the fact that these system stones were lost in an instance to begin with?" Carl asked. "Probably not. Maybe. That's not really relevant right now, though. It happened centuries before you're going to be there." Carl sighed. Getting answers out of Misty was never an easy process. Chapter 14-17 In and Out. Misty immediately opened a portal and shoved him through, while Kara flew after him. It closed the second that Kara was through, and Carl realized that the time dragon was planning something to mess with whoever was watching her. She would put on a big show there, and nobody would realize that her purpose was to send him somewhere. Carl looked around him, wondering where he had been sent, and slowly realized that this location looked rather familiar. It should be somewhere in the swamps of Gabble, southwest of Lake Naraletum. He had been here before when Remy was looking to advance, and they had been looking for signs of the instance that had the system stones at that time as well. Well, signs of that instance and the undead army that was also looking for it, while destroying entire cities along the way. That was quite the mess, but Lord Bomgan had intended to destroy the stones, so that common humans and others couldn't gain more power. There was no shortage of forces that wanted to destroy the system stones, but the giants were certainly among the top of the list. They were already strong enough on their own that they didn't need much assistance from the system. It was more of a source of bonus skills for them than a growth opportunity. Though that could be said for the dragons as well. They would eventually grow up, even without the system helping them. We should have asked her what direction to go. Kara sighed, then shifted into badger form. Carl transformed into his usual cat form, then reconsidered and used greater beast form to give it an upgrade. The two cat forms were similar enough that it still felt like himself, but it was stronger than the original. Well, there is a town off in the distance. We should go ask someone where exactly we are. I've got a pretty good idea, but we can reference the last time we went looking if we know exactly where we are now. In response, she circled his head, then flew off toward the thin plumes of smoke in the distance that should mark a village. Carl followed her lead, jogging along the pathway between deeper water spots in the swamp. It was a precarious route, with most of the high spots bridged with downed trees or improvised vine bridges. But Carl's nose said that this route was regularly traveled by both Naga and lizardmen. Movement in the water caught Carl's attention, but the crocolisk was swimming away, not interested in messing with him today. Carl stopped just short of the entrance to town, where a pair of terrified-looking lizardmen were holding spears in trembling hands, trying to hold Kara at bay. "Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see you this morning." Carl greeted them, but they only looked confused. A glance showed him that they had no system interface, so they must be between resurgences right now. That would explain why they were utterly terrified of a mythic-ranked Chaos Badger. Well, that and a healthy dose of common sense. "Hello, we're just passing through the area. Can you tell me how far it is to the lake from here, and the exact direction?" Carl tried speaking serpent. The two lizard folk only looked more suspicious at the large, furry monster speaking their language. They also didn't respond, but a runner did head into the center of town, presumably to get an elder to convince Carl to go away. So, he simply waited until an elderly Naga shaman came out to speak to him. "Elder, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. As I was telling your gate guards, I merely need to know exactly where I am right now so that I can head in the right direction." The elderly Naga woman nodded. "You are 260 nautical miles southwest of the lake. If you follow a heading of 42 degrees on the compass, you will reach it." So, they were further northeast than where they needed to be. He needed to go in the other direction to get to where the instance should be. It was just outside the swamps in his time, but it should be well outside them now. Carl looked up at the sun to check his sense of direction, and nodded. "Thank you. That works very well to get me oriented. Please take this as a thank you for your assistance." Carl handed her a stalk of sweet swamp grass, a totem-ranked magical herb that grew everywhere in Remy's space. It was used for cleansing potions, antitoxins, and similar potions. It was also native to this region, though supposedly rare. The concept of rarity simply didn't apply within the beast spaces, as long as they put in the work to keep the plants alive. The Naga shaman bowed politely, and Carl smiled at the way her tongue flickered when she was excited. It reminded him of Remy, who did the same thing. Even the way she clutched the herb in both hands was the same. Then Carl turned and led Kara away, following the path away from town. "That was easy," Kara noted. "I don't think that Misty was trying to get us lost. She just needed to drop us far enough from trouble that nobody noticed our entry. If the giants think that we were lost in the swamp, it explains why we would come out in the middle of nowhere." Kara frowned, the scars on her face twisting it into a scowl. "So that's what the tactic was. She's excellent at playing Go." Carl laughed as Kara flew along, lost in thoughts of her game with the time dragon. Beating Misty at a strategy game was no easy task, and Carl wouldn't put it past the dragon to cheat if she started to lose. Chapter 14:18 Familiar Sights. It only took them half the day to get to the edge of the swamp, which was much reduced from their own time. But in their own time, there was a corrupted spell over this whole region, and all sorts of spatial distortions had become commonplace. Hopefully that wouldn't be the case now. It shouldn't if his memory was right. "Shall we set camp?" Carl asked as Kara landed to inspect something in the grass. "Make a nice illusion. and we can have a proper rest. She agreed. Carl nodded. Do you have a preference? Let's go for the city and gargoyle gardens in the Drod Guild House library secret area. Kara decided. Carl laughed as he activated the illusionary domain, using reality warp to make it solid enough that passing nuisances wouldn't mess up their nap. The illusionary gargoyles weren't as good as the real ones, but they would do the job of raising the alarm, and if the intruder was below the totem rank, there was little chance that they would be damaged. Even with reality warp, the illusions weren't as durable as the actual gargoyle spell, but they certainly weren't soft. It would be similar to trying to hack through mythic rank stone, 100 times harder than expected. Anyone who passed by in the evening was sure to be confused by the sudden presence of a small ruined village full of strange-looking buildings, and then even more shocked when it all vanished in the morning. But what mattered to Carl was that there were comfortable beds in some of the houses, and that he could rest peacefully. Dawn came much too early, and Carl prepared to head out after a quick meal. We need to start bringing Lotus with us when we go places. Kara noted. You've got a point. A designated cook should definitely be on the list. I can make some of the basics now, thanks to Leo's affinity for nature magic. But it's still not the same as having a nature priestess with us. It did briefly occur to the pair that they were simply spoiled by an excellent group composition when they traveled. But they had put a lot of work into keeping their group, even if they had started to separate out a little as everyone advanced. You could only push so far and so fast, especially when you were reaching the higher levels. So, they couldn't just make everyone mythic right away. They lacked the necessary comprehension. While they didn't have an exact location, thanks to Misty's typical lack of information, Carl did have a good general idea of where the system stones should be. The old temple wasn't too far from here, and hopefully that was the set that they had been sent for. It was in an odd time distortion the last time that he came across it, and the stones had sealed themselves away. But at this point, it might still be perfectly fine and accessible. Hopefully. Wait, remember the history. That was way before the last resurgence. I don't think that Misty sent us that far into the past. There should be another set around somewhere. The ones that everyone was looking for that were in some grand high muckety-muck's crypt or something. Kara reminded him. Oh, that's a good point. We found what everyone was looking for, but not the place that they were looking for it in. So, there might be a second set of stones somewhere in this country. Good catch. Still, the temple seemed like the best place to start, so Carl headed there anyhow. At a jog, and in his enhanced form, the ground simply flew by underneath his feet, and it only took a few hours until he had to slow to check landmarks to be sure that he was in the right spot. Yes, there it was. The ruined village and what must have been the temple. It was still visible, but it had long since collapsed, abandoned to the sands of time. Kara wandered around the ruined building, looking for any sign of a message that might have been left behind for them. The last person here had been a member of the Darklight host, the last way station attendant in this section of the continent, as her resurgence had come to an end. She had promised to hide the underground levels so that nobody would ever find what was hidden there. But with erosion and curious researchers, nothing remained hidden forever. It was either found or destroyed by the elements. She remembered the layout well enough, and Carl's memories of the place helped. So, it was with great annoyance that she found what should have been the entrance to the secondary basement, the one that was just storage and a sitting room, only to find that it was completely filled with rubble from the collapse of the temple. It had been left open as a decoy for robbers, but now that she wanted to explore it, everything was buried. The part that she was truly interested about was the idols. There used to be statues to all sorts of gods from many species here. But while there were portions of the altars left, there were no signs of the statues or other religious items. Had the cleric moved them to her inventory before she died? That would let them return to wherever the system put inactive inventories and keep them from being desecrated. But she also might have left them, so that adherents of the gods could come to collect them. The war in the region would have eventually ended, and some of the locals might have wanted the keepsakes from the abandoned temple. It certainly didn't look like the place had been looted. There were no broken statue pieces anywhere, and the building hadn't been destroyed by force. It showed all the signs of having collapsed in on itself after the roof had crumbled and removed the lateral support. Though, given that it could have been thousands of years since the place was abandoned, it was still in remarkably good shape for a ruined temple. Chapter 1419 Ask for Guidance. Carl saw a large group in the distance, headed toward their location, and finally noticed that there was a roadway running not far from the ruins. By his best guess, it was a tourist attraction of sorts for the locals, and the group was all dressed in simple monk robes, holding some sort of ritual flags. They weren't moving quickly. They were stopping to pray every few minutes. For Carl, that was a good sign. If this was still a holy place, they should know something about the region in general, and that would help Carl and Kara identify the location where the system stones would most likely be. Well, the other system stones, as the ones that had been at this temple, were apparently long gone. So, he waited as they approached, and then led Kara over to greet them a few hundred meters from the temple ruins. You shouldn't be inside the ruins. If you trample a sacred site, it will upset the gods. An old man among the group of pilgrims noted in a calm tone. Forgive me, but I am familiar with this place, and I was checking to ensure that there hadn't been any damage or theft since the last time that one of our people was here. Carl replied. One of your people? The old man asked. The Dark Light host. We still check in on the old places from time to time. The man folded his hands in the spread wings gesture used by the Golden Dragon Nation, and bowed politely. Forgive me, I didn't recognize you without your ceremonial robes on. Carl waved his hand dismissively. You weren't intended to, but there is another location I have been looking for, an ancient king's tomb which might contain a holy relic. It's not one of our places, but I was asked to find it and ensure that it hadn't been looted. The pilgrims gave him bemused smiles in return. The king's tomb? That's a legend of sorts. Everyone knows where his castle is, but his tomb isn't there. It's been extensively explored, and parts of it are still inhabited. They even had the dragons come with magic to search the ground for hidden caverns. Carl frowned. So, the burial site is hidden, and that is where the holy relics are likely to be. Which means there are likely barriers and traps. Do you know when it was set? Was it while the system was active? The old man nodded. Indeed, you have a keen knowledge of history, it seems. Though that should be somewhat expected from a long-lived race such as yours. The burial site was indeed created during the years when the system was active, and it is believed to have survived the downturn in the key lines. The problem is that the location was deliberately hidden, and while there are rumors that he appointed guardians to watch over it, nobody knows if any are still alive. Carl silently celebrated the system's choice of appearance for him. The cat demon exterior gave him not only respect from a variety of species, it also came with the assumption that he could be much older than he was, as nobody could tell their age with a glance, the way that you could with humans and most dragonkin. So, there is a chance that we might find someone who knows the answer, but logically, they wouldn't tell us just on the word of a stranger that I had good intentions. So, I would assume the best way to go about it is to simply search the regions where it is rumored to be. Carl replied, watching the man's face for unexpected reactions. His face didn't show any unusual reactions, but a few of the pilgrims looked more concerned than eager to gossip about rumors of holy relics. If they were scared he would actually find the place, that was the sort of reaction that he would expect. Would you like to stop for a meal? I will prepare something for your devout pilgrims. Do you have dietary restrictions? Carl asked. The old man smiled. We don't kill anything while we are on this trip. So, only plants that were not uprooted before the end of their life cycle. Carl nodded. Then, summoned food should be fine, right? I don't have the widest variety of options, but if we're talking about rice and beans, I can summon as much as we need. The pilgrims looked shocked at the news. You have the old holy magics? One asked. Not all of them, but I can summon supplies to keep the faithful fed. You see, I am a member of the Darklight host, and I have a certain affinity for the world dragon, that won't leave just because the mana of the ley lines is harder to reach. They didn't truly understand what he was talking about, but assumed that he was one of the elder demons, the ones whose system was still partially activated, even this long into the Dark Ages. I hope that some of you are strong. The spell creates a rather significant amount of food. Carl joked as he activated it, creating a dozen 30-kilo bags of mixed dry rations. The pilgrims began to cry. Actually cry at the sight of so much food. Is this because of the trip? Or are times that hard here? He asked the silent old man. A bit of both. These pilgrims are traveling to the holy sites praying for a better harvest, and the health of their loved ones. If they can get one of the two, it's enough. But between you and me, most of them left so they wouldn't be a burden on their family during the lean times. He whispered, knowing that Carl would be able to hear him when nobody else did. Carl nodded. Perhaps I can help a little with that as well. Does your route take you near any of the suspected locations of the lost burial site? The old man nodded slowly. It does. In fact, it takes us past 5 of them if you believe the rumors. This is one of the locations that it was said the great king visited frequently, so rumors are that he might be buried deep beneath the old temple. Carl shook his head. No, I was here when the temple was still intact enough to access the basement. There is no royal crypt down there. The man gave him a strange look. That was thousands of years ago. Just how long had Carl been checking in on the ancient holy sites of his people? Chapter 1420, and it will find you. Pots were brought out, and a small pouch of seasoning was found within a travel bag slung over a young man's shoulder. Carl noticed that the man only had one hand, the other arm ended above the elbow. So, he would struggle to do most farm work and any other sort of manual labor. It would explain why an otherwise healthy-looking fellow was on pilgrimage with these old folk. Though Carl did see a few gaunt young women with children, so he couldn't rule out that some were just starving or orphaned and hoping for the best. Do you use a holy relic to create the food? The one-armed man asked. Carl shook his head. No, I know the spell. My species has an innate gift for magic, like most of you. But I'm at the mythic rank, so I'm not quite so limited in my options. Your leader is a cleric, is he not? Doesn't he have the gift? The young man shook his head. The old man isn't well. His magic is failing, and he can't cast anything without coughing up blood these days. But he agreed to guide our pilgrimage for as long as possible. That explained it. Priests of the Dragon Church could create food in the Golden Dragon Nation even before the elite program came about, and before the resurgence of his era started. So, they should be able to do it during this era as well. The food started to cook over a small fire, and Carl took a moment to use his affinity for the fundamental rule of mana manipulation to search the area. He could sense himself and Kara. The old man was a weaker fluctuation, an awakened rank cleric. But other than the minor lingering holy aura on the stones of the temple, there was nothing else to be found here. No buried holy relics, no signs of the stones. But in the distance, Carl could feel a disturbance. It could be a dungeon entrance, perhaps an anomaly or instance of some sort. That seemed like a good spot to start, and if these pilgrims continued their path, it would take them right past it. Are we going to take a slow walk with these people? Kara asked as she waited for them to do something interesting. I think so. One of them likely knows more than they're letting on, and I want to know something about the area before we get there. It will take less than a day to get to the location I can sense, even at their pace. But I will set up healing totems for the night, so that they're all fed and rested when it's time to go. Sneaky. I like it. They'll probably think that it's some sort of divine favor. Carl tried not to laugh. Well, I am the avatar of the world dragon. That's almost the same thing, right? Kara stayed in badger form, but brought over a bag of spices for the food, while Carl assessed the carrying capacity of the pilgrims before making a single large sack of oatmeal. A bit of variety so you don't have to eat the same thing every meal. You'll have to portion the remainder between everyone, because none of you are in the sort of shape to be carrying a whole sack of rice and beans. But there are plenty of you to get it done. He explained. A few of the pilgrims laughed. They were in terrible shape, half-starved, diseased and weakened. But if they could carry enough to see themselves through the week, they would be far better off than they were this morning. They were under no illusions that they would be returning home alive. But they did hope that they could complete the loop to make their prayers at all the holy sites to bring luck to their families. Once the food came out, the exhaustion and despair of their trip seemed to fade away. Finally, they had one less thing to worry about, and a much better chance of finishing their trip. That was Carl's time to act. While I was here on a different mission, I would like to know more about your pilgrimage. Do we have a storyteller in the group? He asked. One of the older men shifted his chair, so he was facing the larger portion of the group. I suppose I can do it. I know all the stories. But I'll start from the beginning, since our guest is clearly not a local. In the time of the system, what many call the resurgence of the gods, this land was ruled by a mighty king, known to history as Karaman the Just. It was a time of legend, when mythical dragons roamed the land, mighty giants and divine beasts threatened entire cities. Mighty bastions, they were, made of magical stone, and towering 100 meters tall. The cities of the old world were monuments to divine construction. That was the world that King Karaman was born into, not as the heir of a mighty warlord, but as the bastard son of a village chieftain. However, with the might of the system, a lowly birth meant nothing to the greatest king to ever live. He grew his power and united everything from the ocean to the great lakes of Saihosesa, land of the Supreme Lady. Only when he reached the lands of the dwarves in the east, and the flourishing trade empire of the Bomgan sultans across the ocean, did he stop his unification of the people. Under the fair laws of Karaman the Just, the people worked together, bringing prosperity and security to all. But no good thing can last forever. As he began to grow old, King Karaman built a series of divine cities and temples, intended to extend his memory long past his time in this world. That is the pilgrimage that we are on now, making a loop of the ancient nation, visiting the old holy cities, both living and ruined, along with all the known temples, in an attempt to gather some measure of the divine favor that once blessed these lands. Chapter 1421 Pilgrim Stories. The other pilgrims told short stories about each of the places that they had visited so far, and Carl learned that they had been on the road for 3 months already, touring holy sites as summer faded into autumn. Most of the Dragon Isles didn't get a real winter with snow and such, but it would soon get cold at night, at least enough that they would miss having shelter. They hadn't set up much of a camp, Carl noticed. They didn't have the strength to carry it with them. But they did set up a few tents, which they all huddled beneath, as the sky was threatening rain overnight. In their conditions, they couldn't afford to catch a cold, so they did their best to keep each other warm with the limited firewood that was available. They were in an open grassland area, the only trees around were small and stunted, so finding dry wood had been an issue, even just to cook dinner. But once everyone started falling asleep, Carl got to work, preparing them for the trip ahead. They were going to need a few things. For one, a lightweight fire source that anyone could use, assuming they had at least a little magic. Common rank fire didn't take much, and it cooked beans just fine. Then healing. He set up healing totems around the camp for the evening, and shushed the old cleric when he was about to say something. It was better to let everyone sleep and wake up to a miracle than to make a fuss about how Carl could use healing magic, especially at this time of night when everyone was exhausted. After Carl's warning, the old man just curled up under his blanket and called it a night, trusting Carl and Kara to watch out for them. That might prove to be a mistake 9 times out of 10, but this was the last one, the time when everyone was so weak that even playing pranks on them wouldn't be satisfying. So, Kara watched the open grasslands for something that would be fun to play with. Unfortunately, her presence was scaring away the monsters, and there wasn't anything out here brave enough to come within 5 kilometers of the Chaos Badger. Foiled by her own brilliance. Magically speaking, that was, fortunately for her, there was entertainment to be found. She just had to wait for everyone to wake up and realize that there had been a mythic rank healing totem active all night long. Carl had dismissed them before dawn so nobody would be able to prove for certain that he had done anything. Except the old cleric, that was. But he shouldn't tell on them when they were at a perfectly good holy relic that could be blamed for their amazing transformation. The first few to wake up didn't notice much except that they had the best night of sleep in ages. The ground was hard, but the grass made it relatively comfortable to sleep on, and the rain had never come. But not long after, the pilgrims began to notice that things were definitely off. The young mother who had been hollow-cheeked and near death yesterday suddenly glowed with health. The sick baby wasn't coughing at all, and blistered feet showed no signs of injury when the bandages were changed. Then, the one-armed young man woke up and rubbed his face to wipe away the lingering sleep and dirt, with a hand that he hadn't had last night. The scream made everyone turn to look at him, but he was just waving his arms wildly and shouting. Then, it dawned on everyone else. He was waving his arms. Plural. His arm grew back? Gods be praised. The holy site really does have some divine magic left to it. One of the young mothers gasped, then ran over and placed her baby gently on the stones of the old temple steps. You shouldn't. The old cleric began. It's fine. Those were the front steps to the temple. If there was ever an appropriate place to let a baby rest, that is it. Carl countered. Well, when you put it that way, I must agree. Most temples had bassinets at or near the entrance, and the clergy would watch over infants while the parents went inside to pray. It was also the accepted way of delivering orphans to the church. You placed them in the bassinet, went in to pray, and then didn't take them when you left. Whether the prayer was sufficient for the reason you had left an infant for the church was between you and your chosen deity. But the church wouldn't turn them away. The old priest was trying hard not to say something about the cause being Carl and not the holy relic. But as he had been here to check on it, perhaps they could say that it was divine providence. The holy relic bringing them someone who could cure their woes with a single night's rest. And Carl really had cured their woes. He had made them enough food to last for weeks, healed all their illnesses, old injuries, and even lost limbs. If he started handing out clothing and building them a house, the old man was going to start suspecting that the gods were trolling him. Why don't I make a cart? And then everyone can put their burdens on it and take turns pulling? Carl suggested. Make a cart? With what? One of the men asked, looking at the grass around them. Magic, of course. I have that sort of power. Everyone turned to the cleric, their nominated leader, to see if that was appropriate given their mission. They had sworn off worldly luxuries during the pilgrimage, but a cart to carry the food and the ill didn't seem like it would break too many rules. Go ahead. As long as we are pulling it ourselves and not burdening others or a beast, it is fine. Kara cheered, and a little girl who had previously had a twisted leg, useless from birth, giggled. The thought of the Chaos Badger, who was the size of a small dog, trying to pull a wagon was hilarious. Chapter 1422 paved their way. Carl set a fire for them to cook on, and a pot of oatmeal started their day out strong. They didn't have a huge amount of ground to cover to get to the next site, not more than 20 kilometers by Carl's estimate. But with this group, that would take all day, not most of an hour. That was also where Carl had sensed the disturbance in the mana flows, and he was hoping that would lead him to the system stones that he had been sent here to recover. But first, he had to make them the cart. Not a fancy thing as a human would be pulling it, but a flat cart with an open back to casually move goods in and out of. An ox cart would be the common name for it, but Carl hadn't seen an ox on this entire continent that wouldn't smash this group into pulp. The weakest of dragon kin and other humanoid species had nearly been annihilated. Carl made the lightweight wagon with earth manipulation, stronger than steel, but light enough that 2 common humans could lift it entirely off the ground. That way, if they got it stuck in the mud later, they could unload it and get it to higher ground. The pilgrims happily loaded their supplies, the food and the tents, onto the wagon, which still looked mostly empty. Carl did consider giving them more food, but if he remained for a few days after they found the location, then he would have a chance when the first batch began to run low. They would inevitably start to thin the ration into a soup, and then to something closer to a broth. That was a basic of food shortages. But if he loaded the wagon, they wouldn't panic for some time. Not until after he was gone. "Elder, you should ride. This long journey hasn't been easy on you," one of the men suggested to the cleric. The old man just shook his head. "I haven't felt this good in years. I will walk for today, and if I need to ride later, I will reconsider. Pulling everyone's supplies is already a burden, and you've only had 2 decent meals in months, both of which were in the last 12 hours. But that went without saying." The man nodded and took a spot at one of the arms for the wagon. A bit of cloth looped around his wrist bound it to the wagon, so he didn't have to rely on grip strength, and another man did the same on the other side. That got the wagon moving easily as they walked under the morning sun, and the others took turns walking alongside the wagon, pushing from the rails or the back. "Kara, go ahead and scout the destination for us. If it's promising, I want to know before nightfall," Carl instructed. "Got it. Give me 10 minutes and I'll be up there. It smells promising. Kind of like violence and magic." That was not a smell that he could easily identify, but Carl didn't question her judgment. Kara flying into the distance startled the pilgrims, but Carl simply shrugged and smiled at them. "She needs to spread her wings and get some exercise. She's a high-energy sort. But she will come back when she's bored or hungry," he explained. The pilgrims didn't know a thing about chaos badger biology, or even just what species Kara actually was. But they also had no reason to question Carl's word, and most of them had grown up around domestic animals, cats and dogs. They often got hyper and needed to burn off excess energy, so it made sense. Little did they know that Kara's version of burning off excess energy was napping in her space while repeatedly triggering chaotic foresight to see what she could find. They just continued along the path, stopping periodically to pray. "Oh, I found a spicy portal. I think it might be a good one, but it's not a dungeon. Trial instance, maybe? Might be the place we're looking for," Kara announced when she reached the source of the anomaly. "Is there anyone else in the area?" Carl asked. "Yep, lots of someones. There are orcs here and giants and one angry Bluck dragon. That should be the right place then." But it appeared that they hadn't gotten there first. Instead, they were going to have to argue about their right to access the place with the giants. If they had only run into orcs, it would be fine. They could be negotiated with. All you had to do was make it a challenge, and they would immediately agree that whoever could do it best was the one who deserved it. Such reasonable people. The real issue was that these pilgrims were not going to believe him that it wasn't safe to go there until they had seen it with their own eyes. The mental word of a chaos badger 20 kilometers away was not going to cut it. They continued to walk, and Carl waited for updates from Kara. "I think that the giants and orcs are going to fight over the right to access the whatever this is. It's still locked, they can't get in. But they think it's opening soon." Carl sighed. "All right, I'm on my way. My friends, I will run ahead for a bit. The badger has detected some trouble, but I will try to clear the way to the holy site for you. But before I go, in case I get delayed and don't catch up with you again, take this," Carl announced. Then, he loaded the wagon with bags of beans and rice, oatmeal, and one of dried fruits, which was about the extent of his create food spells abilities. He needed to work on that. Chapter 14:23 Sneak Past. Before the pilgrims could respond, Carl was off at a run. He had given them enough food to eat full meals for at least a month, and with the wagon, they wouldn't have any trouble pulling it along on their journey. That put his mind at ease, knowing that they could turn away from this fight, skip the holy site and move on to the next one, even if he didn't get back to them. When the location came in sight, Kara was flying overhead, throwing stones at the giants and instigating a fight, while the leaders of the two forces postured and argued with each other. "Sneak past them. This is going to take a while, and the trial should be open enough for us to enter," Kara informed him. What she was doing was distracting the giants, who were facing the trial instance portal, preventing them from noticing that it had changed. Once they did, the fight would be started, and the chance that anyone would sneak into the instance would be over. That would just make it harder for them to do the job that they were sent to do, and they didn't even know if this was the right spot yet. If it wasn't the king's burial site, they would just be wasting time in a trial. Carl decided to increase his odds of stealth. He activated both Night Haunter for the mostly invisible incorporeal body, and then invisibility for an added layer of protection before setting an illusionary domain over the whole area so he could more easily hide himself if things started to get spicy. The giants weren't particularly bright, so using the spell to hide the entrance might make them think that it closed if he timed it right. But that time was not now. They were paying too much attention to everything, and some of them had obviously noticed the magic building around them, though they hadn't determined the cause yet. If the portal vanished now, they would attack everything in the area, looking for intruders and the hidden portal. Carl did his best to hide his aura, hoping that nothing would notice he was headed for the portal, as both sides suspected that the other was the cause of the magic they could feel. The orcs were individually weaker without the system, but the hill giants weren't that much stronger, and the orcs had better weapons finely crafted out of magical beast bones so they would cut through higher rank bodies with relative ease. It was a self-perpetuating cycle. The orcs would struggle against magical beasts and giants on their own, but they had taken one down and made weapons that allowed them to take more down, make more weapons, and now they could face off with physically superior creatures using their wits and combat skills. It was a culture that brought them safely through the entire downturn, and one that they held sacred even during the system resurgence. Silently, Carl snuck past the two groups and entered the anomaly portal to see what was inside, though it didn't take an intensive search to tell him that this was the right place. For one, the space felt like a tiny world, not a system trial. For two, he could sense the system's activity here. The rich miasma of energy that felt like his own skill activations. But the interior of the space was not a burial ground in any way that Carl recognized it. There was no altar nor crypt. There was no monument to the great King Karaman. Instead, there was a simple stone summer house next to a babbling brook, splashing over rocks as it circled the space. Carl smiled as he realized the setup actually made the tiny stream something like a moat around a castle, if you could count a 3-bedroom stone house as a castle. Perhaps the king's body was inside? Carl made his way across the grass, and then stopped when he felt power under his feet. The system stones were here. They had just been buried inside the garden, covered by walkways and hedges, so that they wouldn't be easily found by anyone who happened to walk in. Now, the question was how Carl was going to remove them. If he started to destroy the space, it would collapse. Then, he would be kicked out and the stones would be in the open, free for anyone to grab. That would just make things more complicated, and it would almost guarantee that at least one part of the stone array would be destroyed. Instead, Carl began to examine them, as he had done once before, with the stones at the temple. That examination revealed something remarkable. These stones were not divine. They were likely made by an immortal, crafted as a replica of the real system stones. His affinity for the fundamental rule of mana manipulation began to grow as he examined the stones, and how they were linked to the power deep within the planet. It was a wonderful trick of magic to link them so deeply, but Carl realized that was the only way to make them functional. The system was an integral part of their world. You couldn't separate off a bit of it to make system stones without making an entire system to go with them. Reading the runes was only the surface level of the issue. The real difficulty came when you needed to understand how the system stones were linked to the planet, so that the powers left by the World Dragon could be activated and a class granted to the one who used them. But with that revelation came another, far more profound revelation. He didn't need the system stones to activate the system at all. As long as the person had the affinity, he could simply draw upon the dormant power of the planet to cause an activation anytime he wanted. He could even pull up the class change menu for himself. And he did. There wasn't a better option available to him. Beast Master Champion was the only available option on his tier. But he could see all the options that he had turned down in the past, and that was something new. It gave him a clear view of where they would have led, and insight into whether he had chosen the right path. Carl thought that he had. Most of the others led away from the path of the Beastmaster, and none of them led to an avatar-level ability. At least not in their core skills. Are you done messing around in there? The orcs aren't going to be able to keep things under control for long. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.